So again, something that I've seen, and this is an issue that mostly fiction debaters struggle with. So I made this tutorial in an attempt to, help the fiction debaters out there, the people who debate fiction all the time. So look, most of the time, whenever I see people debating fiction, typically they have this weird issue where if somebody interprets a piece of evidence differently to them, then they just don't know what to do. And then they always keep getting caught in this same trap where it's like the other person says equal interpretation and the debate is basically over from there. And, for some odd reason, people just aren't able to refute those type of arguments. And, typically they just aren't able to actually build strong cases for the sort of arguments they're making. Now, I went over an argument, or I went over some ways to counter these sorts of arguments in my offense video, but since somebody wanted an independent video for that, then I guess I'll just make one. So again, typically one interpretation is, for all of the people who don't know, is literally just how you understand a specific story or how you understand a specific work of fiction. Now again, your understanding of a specific work of fiction is completely subjective, and since you do not have access to what the author is thinking directly, in the sense that unless the panel is like really blatant, you quite literally most of the time you don't have access to what the author is thinking. Therefore, like most of the time it's just up to interpretation. So again, whenever people give an interpretation of the scan, typically what you're going to need to do is just get some semantic analysis going. Just see the usage of the word, see the way the panel is framed, see the sort of reactions that the characters are giving towards these specific panels, and then just be able to determine, what are they trying to portray? Are they trying to portray a meaning of, this guy is really strong, hence from all of the, shocked reactions of all of the people around? What sort of message are they trying to portray? And usually by analyzing the sort of the syntax of the statement, or analyzing the sort of words that they're using in the statement or using in the piece of evidence, then you actually be able to come to a much stronger conclusion, seeing as not only will your interpretation be backed by the way the sentence is structured as a whole, but it will also be backed by the reactions from the characters. Additional context like this is what separates like really bad debaters from good ones, because again, typically if somebody is giving you an opposing interpretation, what's going to be most important, not only will it be sort of your knowledge, because of the fact that, if you know enough about the series, there's more context that you can give. So that's another thing that I want to bring up. Typically, whenever people are going against somebody else and that other person has a conflicting interpretation to them, they immediately have this instinct to just start throwing scans at them. Now, throwing scans at them on their own, you may say, if the person you're debating, or if the scans are just like quite blatant, then then it will actually support the view that you're holding. But most of the time, people seem to run into this sort of issue where they think that by continuously throwing scans at this other person, eventually they'll have a quote-unquote preponderance of evidence. But that isn't really how that works. So if there's two different hypotheses, and one of these hypotheses accounts for all of this evidence, and the other one also accounts for all of this evidence, then simply just sending more evidence on your own doesn't actually prove your hypothesis is more likely than the other person's. All it proves simply is just that there's loads of stuff that your hypothesis accounts for, which is completely fine, and I'm not even sure that any rational person would refute that. So if you send a whole bunch of scats, what you want to do is just simply like give a sort of probability argument. So you can say that, based off of the fact that all of these pieces of evidence seem to be implying this one thing. However, you're trying to say that all of these pieces of evidence, even though it is or even though they could be interpreted as all being accounted for under this one hypothesis, you're trying to create multiple separate hypotheses to account for it as well. Now again, that's quite literally the fact that the other person needs multiple other assumptions or multiple other hypotheses, which typically take more assumptions than just having one. Then you notice that their interpretation then becomes less probable. So it isn't because of the fact that they have less evidence, but it's mostly because of the fact that even though they do have even though you are sending more evidence and they are giving different interpretations to all of them, right? Their interpretations really aren't accounting for every single individual piece of evidence and giving it getting a holistic interpretation of it. Rather, what they're doing is just simply giving each individual sort of interpretations to these multiple pieces of evidence, even when they could also all just be implied to be saying the same thing. Now this is the sort of analogy that I typically use whenever whenever I'm talking about like, oh well, what's it called? Oh well, like how do you prove your interpretation is more probable like via that method? So it's like, look, if there's a dead body on the floor, and then there's a dead body, there's a bloody knife, there's a bloody piece of clothing, and a guy with blood on his hands. Now you could say that, well, the reason why the knife could be bloody is because he went to the butcher shop. You could say that the reason why the clothing is bloody is because he went to the butcher shop, right? And you could say that the reason why there's a person with blood on his hands is because he injured his hands on the way to the crime scene. Now, again, all of these interpretations work. They perfectly account for each individual piece of evidence, but because of the fact that you need multiple different sorts of assumptions and multiple different events need to occur for your interpretation to work, right? Whereas in the other instance, you're just saying that the guy with bloody hands probably used the axe to murder him, right? Again, that's just one like situation on its own. So you aren't actually multiplying entities or multiplying situations more than you need to. So because of that, then you will immediately notice that your interpretation is more probable. The second thing is, I've also noticed that whenever people try and appeal to semantics, typically, or trying to like argue over the syntax or the meaning of the statement, and they appeal to the dictionary, typically people will be like, oh well, but that isn't how we use it colloquially. Now, again, look, this is the question, or this is the sort of phrase that I always ask everyone who sort of says this. It's like, well, what do you think the dictionary is used for then? Whenever like somebody, or whenever you're in English class and then you don't understand something and your teacher's like, look it up in the dictionary, right? Like, if the dictionary wasn't an accurate method for being able to discern the meaning of certain terms within a piece of literature, then what would be the point of even using it in the first place? Clearly, the way we actually decide on meanings is, you just see how people use the term. So you see like what's the sort of thing that they're referring to, what's the sort of reference there whenever they use specific terms, and then like you'll be able to like just tell that like that's, and then they just write in a book. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. It's like, it's one of the things which are so obvious that it gets really hard to explain because of how obvious it is, right? It's like you just look at what everyone means whenever they say a specific word and you write it down. So to say that all of a sudden that people when the people just suddenly start varying off of like the usage of the dictionary usage of words, it'd be like, okay, well, if everyone varies off of it and the more likely usage is the one that isn't from the dictionary, then what is the dictionary useful for? Like, what are these people getting paid for? Are they getting paid to do something that will ultimately not be beneficial in anybody's lives? Because that is literally how barely anyone uses the word. It's like, obviously no, obviously that's not how people that's not how the dictionary works, that's not how it's made. And if that is how it's made, which is completely less probable, then you also have a big issue of, okay, well, why are they being paid in the first place? And I don't think anyone can even properly account for the fact that these people are getting paid to make dictionaries in the first place. Like, if if the job they were doing is just completely like nonsensical, completely just benefited nobody, it's like there's no good reason why they should be paid if that's literally what they're doing, or if their job literally just entails just wasting, it's not only wasting their own time if nobody else uses the words that way, but you're also wasting the time of the people who are paying for transport. It's like, look, there's a whole bunch of reasons why the dictionary usage will just be identical, or just be most likely like how people use words. So again, you shouldn't be afraid to appeal to the dictionary whenever you're using terms, because simply that's what the dictionary is supposed to be used for. The dictionary is supposed to help you get clarity on specific terms, and then by getting clarity on these specific terms, you can you can then get a more probable interpretation. Now you can say, oh well, look at this one. This one has one next to his name. This one has two next to his name. So clearly the secondary one is less likely or less used. Most of it's like, yeah, of course. Like, obviously there's going to be a situation where most people use the word this way, but depending on the context, they can use it this other way too. So it's like, yeah, that's the reason why they're ordered, because it's depending on how often people use them. I don't understand sometimes whenever I see people argue about interpretations, it's like, well, did you even pass English class? Like, really, are we being serious? It's like there's no good reason for you to just be giving all of these completely terrible interpretations of evidence. So the third thing is, people seem to have this weird issue of, oh well, if somebody gives me an equal interpretation and they keep giving me equal interpretations, then what do I do? It's like, okay, well, not only does that just show that the only thing they have in their arsenal is just saying, oh, what if it's this, what if it's that? And again, at a certain point, my question is, if you say that your interpretation is equal to somebody else's, that's a claim. I don't understand, why do people not think that's a claim? Like, if you say, if you and I both look at a certain piece of evidence and I give my interpretation, you give your interpretation, and then you say, oh, our interpretations are equal because we're relying on equal amounts of evidence. Well, no, that isn't the determiner of how you prove an interpretation is equal to somebody else's, right? Clearly, an interpretation being equal, all that would entail is that people on average use it either which way. So, or people on average, whenever they see this term, they interpret it either which way, right? Because the likelihood of interpretations is determined by how people, or the sort of implication that people get whenever they see or they are like come into contact with these specific phrases. So because of the fact that like you literally have no evidence that whenever, if people came into contact with this specific piece of evidence, they would interpret it on average just equally to both of you, then it's like that's just a claim that you can't prove. So again, people should be less focused on trying to say, oh, our interpretations are equal, haha, you can't do anything, and more focused on the fact that they should be building probability for the argument they're making, even if you aren't on the assertive. Because I don't understand why people have been able to just promote lazy debating all of this time. But yeah, that's another way to counter just like the equal interpretation stuff. Now, I've seen a really horrible probability argument. Now, this, like, the argument will probably be a lot of like tier 4s because of the fall, like, well, not tier 4s, tier 5s, right? And it was made by Flames, or I don't even know if it was made by Flames. I just know he like came across and started using it, right? But it's like, it basically goes that, oh well, there's two interpretations favoring what I'm saying, right? And there's only one in like favoring what you're saying. So clearly, right, since all of them are equal, my interpretation is more probable. Now, the first thing you should do whenever you hear those type of arguments, or you hear that type of argument, is like, well, why are they equal in the first place, right? For them to be equal, like, people on average need to be picking between each of the three equally, right? So like, let's say there's 50 people. Oh no, let's say there's like 30 people. 10 people need to be picking each individual interpretation, right, for all of them to be equal in the way that Flames is implying it, right? So again, that's the sort of thing where you should even grant that they're equal in the first place. And if they aren't equal, then the argument kind of loses all of its force, because it's like, yes, essentially all you'll be doing then is just be like, oh well, like, I can put the argument in an analogy to show you how stupid it is. So it's like, I say you're an idiot. Now there's interpretation 1, and that interpretation says that you went to the store today, which is completely not offensive. Interpretation 2, I should say, interprets you being an idiot as, oh, you were born today. Again, not offensive. And interpretation 3 says that you being an idiot is a sign of low intelligence, which is supposed to be like offensive. Now, again, right, those two interpretations that I said initially conclude with the fact that a non-offensive statement was made, right? So they conclude, like, the conclusion there, or if those interpretations are true, the conclusion there would be like a non-offensive statement was made, right? However, clearly the last interpretation, even though it concludes with something that is not that a non-offensive statement was made, right? Even though it concludes with that, it is still more probable than the other interpretations, right? Or the other two interpretations, simply because that is how more people use the term, right? So again, to claim that they're equal kind of just has no basis generally, right? So, like, typically, if somebody makes those type of arguments, you just want to question, well, why are they equal in the first place? And again, you'll notice that the person who's forwarding the argument in this context is most likely Flames who's forwarding it, or anyone else who's typically forwarding it. They don't really have a good reason why they're equal, and instead what they'll circle back on is just the fact that, oh well, we're relying on equal amounts of evidence, which typically doesn't work. But yeah, if you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe. This has been Shinra, and I'm